many thanks to the All-Party Parliamentary Group for the invitation to speak, and to all of you for coming along and supporting this event. I'm afraid I'm going to have to do the classic DCLG thing, with many apologies of doing so, of disappearing after this presentation. So I won't talk for too long, because I know people have questions for me, and I've heard some of them from the earlier session. So I'll whip through fairly quickly and give you a chance to ask me things that you would like to ask. But I was really pleased to have the opportunity to come here. In fact, one of the questions that was asked just before we broke was whether central government recognised the need for coordination of this kind of work, and I would say absolutely we did, and that's why I'm here, and that's why we have funded the project for at least a year, and we'll talk a bit more about future funding shortly. So just in terms of where we are, the mission statement, I was expecting everybody to have used this slide and to be very bored by it already, but just a reminder of what it is this programme is actually here to do. And the reason I think it's so exciting is because, as other speakers have said, this is really a brilliant example of fire and rescue services coming together to provide something which is of value across the whole country, across the whole UK, not even just England, which is of course DCLG's particular interest, but across the UK, and doing so in partnership with the devolved administrations as well. And it's been a brilliant example of real leadership, I think, from the programme team and from all of those services who've given so much time and resource in terms of their staff and financial contributions to the programme to actually get us to the place that we're in at the moment. And I think it's we in DCLG often sort of struggle with the question of how do we deal with some of these issues where central government really doesn't itself have an awful lot of skin in the game. I mean, it's important to us, we know that it's important, but really the real value is to services themselves. It's not me or my team who will be put in those difficult and very dangerous situations. It's people in fire services around the country who need to be able to know how to respond and to know that they're working with the best possible guidance. And we were in this difficult position, as people have said, 8,000 pages of guidance. We knew it wasn't up to date, that there were inconsistencies, there were problems, but not the expertise any longer sitting within the department to really do very much about that. We had great leadership from London Fire Brigade to take the programme through its initial years. I'm very grateful to colleagues there for that. But really, having seen the programme move now to a place where there is genuine engagement from across England is incredibly heartening and very important. As I say, I think it's an exemplar for how that kind of work can be done in the future. In terms of where the department is, so as I said, we've committed to spending of £1 million in this financial year, half of which we have contributed already, and the other half will be paid at the end of this month. It wasn't an easy process, I think it's fair to say, to get to that point of agreeing that money. We had lots of conversations with the programme board, with Steve, who sat over there, and we actually had both Steve and Roy, who came along to the department and who talked to our investment subcommittee about the case for funding this work and explained the value of it. I think the thing that really made a difference to those decisions was being able to say that this was a project that was being owned by fire and rescue services across the country, that genuinely had that buy-in, and was going to put itself onto a sustainable footing for the future. So we were in this difficult position, there was a lot of work to do, but actually doing that work and doing it in a partnership way would mean that we were in a much better position for the future. And somebody asked in the session before the brief break, what about the funding for the future? And that was a key part of that discussion. So what we were very clear about was that from government's perspective, recognise there's a particular issue, we want to work in partnership with the sector, but really this is something we want to see the sector take ownership of and move forward with. There are some brilliant opportunities, I think, that come from the way that this project has been run, from the engagement from across the service, and from the fact that actually we're now working in a world where technology allows us to do much more than we were able to do at the time the original guidance was put together. So I think there's a challenge for us in making sure that we make the most of those opportunities, because, as I say, one of the key elements for the success of the business case was that feeling that both there was engagement from across the country and from fire and rescue services who do their bit in making sure that the products were provided and were funded, and it wasn't just a case of DCLG paying for something which in a number of years' time we would find was also out of date and we were facing the same difficulty again. So it had that ownership and that future sustainability built in. In terms of moving forward, there are a few things I just wanted to mention here as I have the opportunity. One of those was about the digital aspiration for the programme. So again, this was something that we found very convincing when we talked to the programme team about how this would work in the future, that there are opportunities to do things differently working with electronic versions of guidance. And we know technology moves on all the time, moves on the incident ground, as well as in terms of the technology that we all of us access every day. So there are some really valuable opportunities and ways of thinking about what guidance looks like and how it can be updated in the future. I think we need to just make sure we're exploiting. So quality assurance is obviously very important as part of that. So I'm not talking about having a wiki version that just somebody goes in and updates without any kind of QA at all. But at the same time, the opportunity that's being provided by the way the guidance is being structured, by that staged approach that people were talking about earlier, gives us a really good way into, I think, looking at how we update that in a way that is most efficient, that's most cost effective. That doesn't mean you have to go back to square one every time you need to change a small element of the guidance. I did promise that I would mention, because believe it or not, people did ask, the consultation on the emergency services collaboration, because that's such a big part of the context in which we're all now operating. It was Roy mentioned earlier the close connections with GESIP. In terms of the consultation itself, just a quick update on where we are. So hopefully people have seen it and know that it's about enabling closer collaboration between all three emergency services. It's particularly around the duty to collaborate, which got mentioned earlier. And then in relation to governance, talk specifically about opportunities to bring fire and police governance closer together. The consultations just closed at the end of last month. We've had 600 responses, so good level of interest, and some very useful and interesting points have been made in response to that. So we're working through those responses at the moment, and there'll be a formal government response to that consultation shortly. As people will be aware, the proposals that were set out in that consultation document will require primary legislation to take forward. So that will, as ever, be brought forward when parliamentary time arrives, and taking into account some of the comments and views that we've received on the detail of those proposals through that process. I've already talked about the Fire and Rescue Authority commitment to the programme being very important. And the only other thing I would say about that is that we are going to continue to be in a very difficult and challenging economic environment. Decisions around spending for the department aren't going to get very much easier. People may have seen some of the press that talked about the fact that we've settled early with the Treasury, so that we are looking at a year-on-year reduction in our resource budgets of around 8% throughout the spending review period. So we're going to need to continue to justify every penny of spending that the department spends. I think we're in a good place in terms of the case for this programme and the engagement of everybody in this room in terms of being able to say that here is a programme that's actually all fire and rescue authorities are signed up to, people are playing an active role in, is really important. But of course the difficulty of the case will depend on that tight financial envelope in which we're working. So we don't know yet what the outcome will be for this programme. We will need to look along at the commitment to this alongside other commitments, and ministers will need to take a view on that in the light of the final outcome of the spending review, which will be formally announced on the 25th of November, and the range of other priorities that they will have to consider. So sorry, I can't say now what the outcome will be. What I can say is that everybody here has put a good case together. The programme team put a strong case for this guidance. I think the fact that we've got such strong commitment from across fire and rescue services is really, really valuable. So we're in a good place.